The late autumn sky carried a muted shade of grey, the kind that always settled over small towns, tucked between long highways and silent plains. The air was cool enough to sting the skin, yet not cold enough to crystallize breath. As the black sedan cut through the two-lane road stretching toward the horizon, Samuel Reed kept his eyes fixed on the fading sunlight, as if the answer to every ache he had ever carried might be hiding somewhere in the streaks of gold dissolving behind the distant hills. Samuel had spent most of his adult life far from the rural landscape spreading before him now. The uneven fences, the wide fields dotted with barns, the peeling gas stations, the diner signs flickering in tired neon. Nothing about this place had changed, nothing except him. Years had reshaped him into someone the boy he once was wouldn't have recognized, a man who had clawed his way out of poverty through relentless work, long nights, and an unwavering belief that success could heal wounds. He had become wealthy, admired, respected. Yet the emptiness he carried inside, the bitter void left by unanswered questions, had never truly faded. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel as his mother's name surfaced again in his thoughts, as it had every day for so many years. Margaret. The woman who raised him alone, who worked 2 jobs, who sacrificed rest and comfort so he could eat, study, dream. A woman with tired hands and soft eyes, eyes that he could barely remember now, eyes that had vanished from his life when he was barely an adult, leaving behind no explanation, no goodbye, only a hollow place where certainty should have been. For years he searched, first out of anger, then out of confusion, and finally out of longing. He had paid investigators, sifted through old records, visited towns he barely remembered. Every lead had collapsed, every clue had dissolved, until recently, a letter, a simple yellowed envelope mailed to an office assistant who nearly threw it away. The handwriting was shaky, the signature incomplete. But the address inside pointed him back here, to this town he had fled more than 2 decades earlier. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but he knew he needed to face whatever truth awaited him. The town limits approached with a modest sign, its paint chipped and faded. He slowed the car, not because of traffic, there rarely was any, but because his chest felt tight, like his ribs were bracing themselves for a hit. Rows of modest houses lined the main street. Some were newly painted, others sagged with age. Familiar names hung above small businesses: the Baker Family Hardware, Lorna's Floral Shop, King's Pharmacy. Samuel remembered walking past some of them as a boy, his backpack bouncing against him, his mother's voice echoing behind, urging him not to be late for school. He rarely listened. Back then, he thought he had all the time in the world. He parked near the old courthouse, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. The town square lay ahead, a cluster of benches, a brick fountain that hadn't worked in years, a tall oak tree that cast a wide shadow across the worn grass. Faint laughter drifted from the direction of the small park, where a few children played. Their carefree voices brought a mix of warmth and ache. Samuel checked the paper he had folded in his jacket. The handwriting trembled across the page. "If you still want answers, come find me. I can tell you where Margaret went, I can tell you why. Signed only with a first name, Evelyn." He didn't know an Evelyn. His mother never mentioned one. But the address included a small house on the far side of town, in a neighborhood where homes stood close together, and porches sagged under their own weight. He stepped out of the car, the chill wrapping around him. As he crossed the square, he tried to assemble memories like scattered puzzle pieces, but most didn't fit anymore. His mother leaning over the kitchen sink, his mother sweeping the porch as he pretended not to see her watching him leave for school, his mother sitting up late in a thin nightgown, counting change on the table. There were years when she seemed to grow older overnight, lines deepening along her face, shoulders slumping from fatigue. He reached the diner at the corner, the same one that once served thick milkshakes he could barely afford. The scent of frying onions hit him instantly. Through the window, he saw a handful of people hunched over plates, including an elderly man who looked like he might have been sitting in that same booth since Samuel was a teenager. Inside the diner, warmth and nostalgia collided in a way that made Samuel's throat tighten. The waitress, middle-aged, hair tied back, glasses slipping down her nose, looked at him with polite curiosity. "Afternoon, honey. Grab a seat anywhere you like." Her accent dragged slightly on each word, just like the locals he remembered. He sat at the counter. She poured coffee without asking. "Passing through?" she asked. Something in Samuel hesitated. He didn't want attention. He didn't want questions. He didn't want to explain why he was here after so many years. "Just visiting," he said simply. She nodded as if she understood more than he said. Not many folks come back unless they left something behind. The words hit deeper than she knew. Samuel stared at the dark surface of his coffee, his reflection distorted and uneasy. After drinking half the cup, he paid and stepped back outside. The sun had dipped lower, leaving the sky bruised with purple. The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the pavement. He made his way toward the residential area, passing a school, a faded playground, and a row of mailboxes. He found the street from the letter and walked slowly, scanning house numbers until he stopped in front of a small pale blue home with a sagging porch. He knocked twice. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. A woman in her late 70s peered out. Her white hair was pinned loosely, her expression cautious but not unkind. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Are you Evelyn?" Samuel asked gently. She blinked slowly, as if uncertain whether she should answer. Then she nodded. "Yes, you must be Samuel." His breath caught. "You know my name." "I recognized your eyes," she murmured. "Your mother always said you had her eyes." Samuel's heart lurched. He had come prepared for disappointment, mistruths, maybe even deceit. But not this. Not someone who spoke of his mother with familiarity. "Please," Evelyn said, pushing the door open wider. "Come in. You've waited long enough to know the truth." The living room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A crocheted blanket lay across a sofa. A framed photo stood on a shelf. Evelyn with a younger woman Samuel didn't recognize. His gaze lingered on the picture, but Evelyn motioned him to sit. She settled into an armchair across from him, her thin hands folding over each other. "I imagine you have many questions," she said softly. "I do," Samuel replied. His voice barely held steady. "I need to know why she left, why she never contacted me, why she disappeared without a word." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Your mother carried burdens that she never shared with you. Burdens that weren't her fault. She kept quiet because she believed silence would protect you." Samuel stiffened. "Protect me from what?" Evelyn hesitated, as though choosing her next words with great care. "Your mother didn't leave because she wanted to," she began. "She left because someone forced her hand, someone close." Samuel's pulse quickened. "Who?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. "Your mother had a sister. You knew that, didn't you?" Samuel frowned. "Barely. They weren't close." "There's a reason for that," Evelyn said quietly. "Your aunt did something unforgivable, something that pushed your mother into a corner she couldn't escape." The room seemed to shrink as Samuel leaned forward. "What did she do?" Evelyn exhaled a long, shaky breath. "It started after you graduated. Your mother was working long hours. She wanted to keep you focused on your future, on your dreams. She never told you how difficult things had become. She was in debt, Samuel. Serious debt, medical bills, unpaid rent. She was drowning." Samuel swallowed hard. He remembered glimpses, his mother coughing at night, hiding envelopes, turning the conversation away whenever he asked if she was all right. "She should have told me," he whispered. "She didn't want to burden you," Evelyn replied. "She told me that every time she came to my door in tears." Samuel looked up sharply. "She came to see you?" "Many times. She trusted me. Not many people knew that." Evelyn paused. Her eyes glistened. "One day, she received a visit from your aunt, who had discovered her financial situation. Instead of helping, she offered a cruel proposition. If your mother agreed to leave town quietly without contacting you, your aunt would pay off every debt. She threatened to sabotage your opportunities, to spread lies that could ruin your future prospects if Margaret refused." Samuel felt as if the ground beneath him was shifting. "Why would she do that?" "Jealousy," Evelyn whispered. "Resentment. Your mother always sacrificed for you. Your aunt believed she gave you too much. She thought Margaret depended on her and she wanted control. She justified it by saying that leaving would make you stronger, more independent." Samuel clenched his fists. "That's insane. Some people twist love into power," Evelyn said softly. "Your mother was terrified. She believed your aunt could ruin everything you worked for. She didn't want you to lose your future because of her mistakes." "She should have trusted me," Samuel said, his voice cracking. "She did trust you." Evelyn leaned forward. "She trusted you to succeed without her. She trusted you to build a life that couldn't be destroyed." Samuel's throat tightened painfully. "So she left," he murmured. "She didn't want to," Evelyn said. "She cried for weeks before she made the decision. But she told me she had no choice. Where did she go? He asked. Evelyn's answer came slowly. She moved to a small community outside town, not far. She found work. She lived modestly. She kept to herself. She followed your life from a distance. News articles, business reports, interviews. She was proud of you more than you'll ever know. Samuel's heart pounded. Is she still there? He asked. Evelyn hesitated. A deep sadness crossed her face. Samuel, there's something else you need to know. He braced himself. Your mother's health declined over the years. She struggled, both physically and emotionally. She wanted to see you, but every time she gathered the courage, something held her back. Guilt, fear, shame. Evelyn's eyes welled. She passed away earlier this year. The words crashed into the room with brutal force. Samuel's breath caught. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't move. The air thickened, heavy with disbelief. No, he whispered. No, I just got here. I'm so sorry, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. She left something for you. It's the reason I finally wrote that letter. She reached for a small wooden box from the side table. Its surface was worn, edges softened by time. She placed it gently in his hands. She asked me to give this to you if the day ever came. Samuel stared at the box, unable to open it, afraid of what it might contain, afraid of the finality it represented. I didn't get to say goodbye, he murmured. She believed you would find your way back, Evelyn said. She never stopped believing that. Samuel lowered his head, tears falling silently onto the wooden lid. Outside, the wind rustled across the porch, carrying with it the weight of years lost and truths buried too long. Inside, he held the only piece of closure he had ever been offered, and it broke him. The night pressed in slowly, settling over the small town with the weight of an old memory. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pale halos across the quiet sidewalks. As Samuel stepped outside Evelyn's house with the wooden box still clutched in his hands, he felt the air grow colder, not the kind of cold that numbs the skin, but the kind that slips beneath it, quiet, steady, unyielding. He stood on the porch for several minutes, unable to move. Every word Evelyn had spoken replayed in his mind. His mother's debts, her forced departure, her silent suffering, her final years spent in solitude, and now this box that felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. When he finally walked back toward his car, the street was nearly empty. A lone dog barked somewhere in the distance. A television glowed behind a curtained window in a nearby house. The wind stirred the branches overhead, scattering brittle leaves along the pavement. He placed the box on the passenger seat and sank into the driver's seat. For a long moment he rested his forehead against the steering wheel, breathing slowly, fighting the ache expanding through his chest. He had imagined countless scenarios about finding his mother, perhaps resentment, perhaps reconciliation, perhaps a long and difficult conversation, but never this, never arriving too late, never discovering that she had watched his life from afar, unable to reach him, afraid to interfere. He had come prepared to confront her, to demand answers. Instead, he found only an absence, one that cut deeper than any truth could have. The silence in the car pressed in on him. At last, with a trembling hand, he lifted the box onto his lap. The wood was aged, its once polished surface marked by scratches and faded patches. The small metal latch clicked softly as he opened it. A faint scent rose from inside. Paper, fabric, something familiar and distant. On top lay a folded piece of paper. His mother's handwriting drifted across the page in irregular strokes, the ink fading. His chest tightened as he unfolded it. My dear Samuel, if you are reading this, then I was not strong enough to face you in person. I wanted to see you again more times than I can count. I wanted to explain myself, to tell you everything, but I was afraid. Afraid of hurting you again, afraid you would reject me, afraid that the choices I made would overshadow the love I always felt for you. Samuel blinked hard, his vision blurring. I left because I believed it would protect you. I left because I was told that if I stayed, your future would be taken from you. I could not let that happen. You deserved more than I could give. You always did. He swallowed, feeling a deep ache rise in his throat. Not a day passed that I did not think of you. I followed your successes with pride that words cannot describe. Every accomplishment, every step you took forward, I carried all of it with me. You gave my life purpose, even when you thought I had abandoned you. His mother's handwriting wavered toward the end, the letters shrinking. I am sorry. More sorry than you will ever know. I hope that someday, even if you cannot forgive me, you will understand why I made the choices I did. I never stopped loving you. Your mother." A tear landed on the page, smudging one of the words. Samuel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, then carefully placed the letter aside. Beneath it lay a few small items. An old photograph of him at around 6 years old, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. A paper wristband from a school fair. A dried flower pressed between 2 pieces of thin plastic. And underneath everything, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, was a small key. He picked it up slowly. The metal was cool, its surface worn by years of handling. A key to what? He lifted the cloth and found a final note beneath it. "The key is for the place where I spent my last years. Someone there will tell you the rest." The words struck him like a cold wave. There was still more truth, more pain, more of her story buried somewhere he had yet to go. He closed the box gently, running his fingers across the lid. The weight of the key in his palm felt symbolic, like the last thread connecting him to a woman he had spent decades searching for. A truck rumbled down the street, its headlights washing across the car interior. Samuel blinked, realizing how late it had become. He started the engine and drove slowly toward the small inn where he had booked a room earlier that week, without truly knowing if he would have the courage to return here. The inn sat near the edge of town, a 2-story building with faded shutters and a sign that squeaked whenever the wind shifted. The parking lot held only a few cars. A soft glow spilled from the front office. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. A radio played quietly behind the reception desk, broadcasting a calm, late-night talk show. The clerk, an older man with thinning hair, looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Evening? Long day?" he asked. "You could say that," Samuel replied, his voice low. The clerk nodded sympathetically and handed him a key attached to a wooden tag. "Room 12, he said. "Second floor, end of the hall. Let us know if you need anything." Samuel thanked him and made his way upstairs. The hallway lights flickered as he walked, casting thin shadows along the walls. The air smelled faintly of dust and linen detergent. Inside the room, he placed the wooden box on the small table near the window. The space was modest. Thin curtains, a bed that creaked when he sat, a lamp with a cracked shade. Outside, he could hear faint traffic from the highway beyond the trees. He rested his hands on his knees and stared at the carpet for what felt like several minutes. His mind churned with thoughts, memories of his mother, questions about her final years, the unfinished story she had left behind. Eventually, he rose and approached the window. The town lights shimmered faintly in the distance. To the north, a cluster of buildings marked the industrial district where his mother used to work long shifts. To the east, faint silhouettes of houses spread across a low hill. Quiet, dim, unchanged. He wondered how many nights she had slept only a few miles from him, while he traveled the world building a life she never shared. He wondered how many times she had held that wooden box, debating whether to send it. He wondered if she had hoped, even in her last days, that he would come back. He pressed his palm to the glass. "I'm here now," he whispered, but it was too late. He lay down, fully dressed, exhaustion finally overtaking him. The night passed in fragments, shallow dreams, sudden awakenings, the hollow ache of regret. When dawn finally broke, thin sunlight seeped through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the room. He sat up slowly. The box still sat on the table, the key beside it. He picked up the key, turning it between his fingers. There was only one place it could belong to, the address where his mother had lived in her final years. Evelyn had hinted at it, but had not shared the details. He reached for his phone, opened the navigation app, and typed the address Evelyn had scribbled for him on a separate slip of paper before he left her house. A small community on the outskirts, quiet, partially rural, almost forgotten. He wondered who would be there waiting for him, who held the rest of his mother's story, who had watched her decline, who had seen her last smile, who might know what she had endured after disappearing from his life. He drove out of town as the sun rose higher. The landscape shifted gradually from modest neighborhoods to patches of open land dotted with small farms and aging houses. The road narrowed, then turned to gravel. Dust rose behind his tires as he continued deeper into the rural stretch. Eventually he saw a cluster of homes, small, weathered, spaced unevenly along a winding road. Some were freshly painted, others looked abandoned. A few had old cars parked beside them, their hoods covered in rust. He pulled up to a pale yellow house with a sagging porch and peeling trim. A wind chime clinked softly in the breeze. An old bicycle leaned against the railing. He stepped out of the car and approached the door. His pulse quickened with every step. When he knocked, it was soft at first, then firmer. After a moment, the door opened. A woman in her early 60s stood before him. Her dark hair, streaked with grey, was tied loosely at the back. Her expression was cautious but not defensive. "Can I help you?" she asked. Samuel took a steady breath. "My name is Samuel Reed. I was told that someone might know about my mother, Margaret Reed." The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes softened, her shoulders eased, and something that looked like sadness crept across her features. "You're Margaret's son," she said quietly. "She talked about you all the time." Samuel's breath caught. "You knew her?" "Yes," the woman said, stepping aside. "Come in. There's a lot you need to know." He entered the house. The living room was small but warm, filled with mismatched furniture and framed photos. A faint scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen. On a shelf by the window, a collection of small potted plants reached toward the sunlight. The woman gestured for him to sit. "My name is Nora," she said. "I lived next door to your mother for many years. I was one of her closest friends." Samuel nodded slowly. "Thank you for seeing me." "No need to thank me," Nora said softly. "Your mother would have wanted this." The words struck a deep chord. Nora sat across from him, hands folded. "There's something you need to understand about your mother's final years," she began. "She struggled a lot, with her health, with guilt, with loneliness, but she also found moments of peace, small joys, people who cared about her. She wasn't alone, not completely." Samuel exhaled shakily. "I wish I had been there." "She wished that too," Nora said gently. "But she never blamed you. Not once." Samuel's jaw tightened as he fought back a wave of emotion. "Did she ever talk about what happened, why she left?" Nora nodded. "She told me everything. It broke her heart to leave you. But she was convinced it was the only way to protect your future. She stayed away because she believed it was best for you." Samuel looked down. "I don't know if I can forgive that." "You don't have to." "Not right away," Nora said. "But you should hear the rest." She rose slowly, walked to a small cabinet and returned with a thin envelope. "This was meant for you," she said, handing it to him. "She wrote it during her last weeks." Samuel took it with trembling hands. Nora continued, "There's more. She had a room here, one she kept almost exactly the same for years, as if she were waiting for something. Or someone." Samuel's heart pounded. "A room?" "Yes," Nora said gently. "Come, I'll show you." She led him down a narrow hallway toward a closed door at the end. The key in his pocket pressed against his leg, cold and heavy. Nora paused at the door. "There are things in here she never showed to anyone, things she only wanted you to find." Samuel reached into his pocket, pulled out the key, and placed it into the lock. It fit perfectly. His hand shook as he turned it. The door creaked open. And the life his mother had lived without him, years of pain, hope, regret, and unspoken love, waited quietly on the other side. The hinges groaned softly as the door opened, revealing a small room lit only by the muted daylight seeping through thin curtains. Dust hovered in the air, drifting lazily like the remnants of a long-forgotten memory. Samuel stood motionless at the threshold, his hand still resting on the doorknob, as a cold ripple traveled down his spine. He had imagined what he might find: photos, letters, maybe a few belongings, but nothing could have prepared him for the quiet intensity filling the space. The room was simple, almost humble. A single bed with a faded quilt pressed neatly over it sat against the far wall. A wooden dresser, its surface worn, stood near the window. A small table held a ceramic lamp and a stack of books whose spines had softened with age. The walls were lined with a few framed photographs, most of them too distant to distinguish from where he stood. Nora stepped beside him, speaking softly. She kept this room exactly like this for many years. She cleaned it weekly, changed the sheets every month, dusted every corner. She always said she wanted it to be ready if you ever came back. Samuel swallowed hard. The air in the room tasted faintly of lavender, a scent he remembered from his childhood, lingering on his mother's clothes, her hands, even her hair. He stepped inside slowly, almost afraid that moving too fast might disturb something sacred. At first he simply stood there, absorbing every detail. The room felt frozen in time, like a quiet monument to a past neither of them had been able to escape. He moved toward the dresser, running his fingers over its surface. The wood was smooth in places, rough in others. On top of it sat a small jewelry box, an old brush and a folded piece of fabric that looked like a scarf. She wore that often, Nora said from behind. Especially in her first years here, she said it reminded her of happier times. Samuel picked up the scarf gently and pressed it between his fingers. For a moment he closed his eyes. He could almost feel a faint echo of warmth, as if the fabric itself still held fragments of her. "You can take anything you want," Nora said softly. "She would want you to." Samuel nodded but didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the nightstand beside the bed. A small notebook lay there, its cover worn and corners bent. He reached for it slowly. Nora took a step back. "I'll give you some privacy." He turned to her. "Thank you." She nodded once, her expression kind and understanding, before stepping out and pulling the door closed behind her. The latch clicked softly, leaving him alone with the remnants of a life he never truly knew. The notebook felt heavy in his hands as he sat on the edge of the bed. He opened it hesitantly. The handwriting inside was unmistakable, uneven, delicate, written with the same timid strokes he had seen in the letter from the box. Day 1. I hope he is well. I hope he is safe. I hope he knows I love him. The words blurred slightly as Samuel blinked rapidly. He continued reading. Day 8. I tried writing him a letter today. I could not finish it. I am afraid he will hate me if he ever reads my words. Day 12. I saw an interview with him on the news. He looks so confident, so determined. I am so proud. It hurts. Samuel exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. Every line felt like a voice calling out from the past, a voice he desperately wished he could answer. He turned more pages. Day 23. I had a dream about him last night. He was little again, running down the hallway, laughing. I woke up crying. Day 32. My health is getting worse. I do not want him to see me like this. I want him to remember me strong. Page after page chronicled her quiet suffering, her fear, her longing. Some entries were long, filled with descriptions of her days, her job at the local store, the friends she slowly made in the small community, the struggles she faced with her health. Other entries were short, consisting of only one sentence written shakily across the page. I miss him. At one point, Samuel's breath hitched as he reached an entry dated roughly 5 years earlier. Day 339. I went to town today. I saw a young man who looked like him from behind. My heart almost stopped. When he turned around, it was not him, of course. But for a moment, I let myself believe it. Samuel closed the notebook briefly, pressing it against his forehead. His shoulders trembled as he tried to steady himself. He had spent years searching for her, but she had spent just as many years longing for him, while remaining convinced that contacting him would bring him pain or danger. When he finally opened the notebook again, a small photo slipped out from between the pages and fluttered onto the bed. He picked it up. It was a picture of him, around 10 years old, standing beside his mother in front of their old apartment building. His arm was wrapped around her waist, his smile wide and innocent. Her smile was tired but genuine. He traced the edges of the photo with his thumb. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." The room felt unbearably still. He set the notebook aside and stood, moving slowly toward the framed photos on the wall. Most were landscapes or pictures of local gatherings, festivals, neighbors, small celebrations. But one frame held something different, a handwritten note pinned behind the glass. "I believe he will come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And I will be here when he does." Samuel rested his fingertips against the frame, his throat tightening. Turning back to the bed, he spotted a small wooden box beneath it. He knelt and pulled it out. Inside were a few trinkets, a ticket stub from a movie they had watched together when he was around 13 years old, a button from a jacket he had worn as a teenager, and a small envelope labeled only with his name. His breath caught as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. "Samuel, I am sorry I could not be the mother you deserved. I am sorry I left you without answers, and that my fears kept me from reaching out. I want you to know something. Everything I did, every choice I made was to protect your future. I hoped that one day you would look back and understand that I acted out of love, even when it must have felt like abandonment. You were the best part of my life. You always will be. Your mother." He pressed the letter to his chest, feeling a deep ache ripple through him, a grief so profound it hollowed him out from the inside. After several minutes, he finally lowered the paper and looked around the room again. Everything here was a reminder not just of what she had lost, but what he had lost too. Moments they never shared, conversations they never had, the years that slipped through their fingers like water. Taking a deep breath, he stood and began searching the room more deliberately. He opened drawers, careful not to disturb their order more than necessary. Inside them he found old receipts, grocery lists, pieces of fabric, and a few letters she had never sent. Each one started, none of them finished. One read, "Samuel, I am so proud of you. I saw your name in the newspaper today. I wish I could tell you in person." Another read, "I want to call you, but I do not know if I have the right anymore." Another, "I miss you every day. If only things had been different." His hands shook by the time he reached the last unsent letter. He didn't read it immediately. Instead, he set it gently aside, overwhelmed. He moved to the closet. Inside hung only a few clothes, simple blouses, worn cardigans, a light jacket. On the shelf above them was a cardboard box labeled Samuel's Things. He brought it down and set it on the bed. Inside was a carefully folded collection of reminders from his childhood, drawings, school assignments, small crafts he had made as a kid. A clay figure he vaguely remembered sculpting in elementary school sat in one corner, chipped but intact. She had kept everything. He felt a wave of guilt, heavy and sharp. He had become successful, respected, known in his industry. He had built businesses, earned awards, traveled to places he once only dreamed of. But through all of that, he had never taken the time to come back, not even once. He had been too consumed with ambition, too focused on proving himself, too determined to outrun the pain of abandonment. He had not realized that the person he had been running from was the same person he had been searching for. He sat on the floor beside the bed, surrounded by fragments of a life lived in quiet longing. He pressed his hands over his face, breathing unevenly. After a while, the soft creak of the door caught his attention. He looked up to see Nora standing in the doorway, her expression gentle. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said hesitantly. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Samuel nodded slowly, though his voice trembled when he spoke. "I don't know if I'll ever be all right again." Nora stepped into the room and sat beside him on the floor. "Grief doesn't disappear," she said softly, "but it changes, and someday you'll be able to look at her memory without breaking." He swallowed, unable to speak. "She loved you more than anything," Nora continued gently. "Every day, every year, even when she was sick, even when she could barely get out of bed, you were the one thing she never gave up on." Samuel nodded slowly. I wish I had known." "She didn't want you to worry," Nora said. "She wanted you to live your life fully, and you did. She was proud of you." He looked around the room again, feeling both comforted and devastated by the stillness. "There's something else," Nora said, her voice soft but steady. "Something she told me when her health got worse. I don't know if it will bring you peace or more pain, but it belongs to you now." Samuel turned to her, waiting. "She told me that if you ever found her, if you ever walked into this room, I should tell you the truth she carried until the very end." Nora paused, her eyes glistening. "She didn't just leave because of the threat your aunt made. There was more, something she never wrote in her letters." Samuel's breath caught. "What is it?" Nora hesitated, then spoke. "She found out something about your aunt, something that changed everything she believed about your family, something she thought would destroy you if you ever learned it too young." Samuel felt his stomach twist. "What did she find out?" Nora looked down, her voice trembling. "It's about the real reason your aunt wanted her gone." Samuel's pulse quickened. Nora took a slow breath. "And it's about you." The room seemed to freeze. Samuel stared at her, trying to process her words, preparing himself for whatever truth she was about to reveal, one more piece of the past that had been hidden for far too long. The following morning arrived wrapped in a strange stillness, the kind of quiet that precedes life-changing decisions. The small town was still asleep when Ethan woke before dawn, unable to remain in bed any longer. A soft veil of mist hung over the narrow streets, blurring the outlines of the old houses, as if the world were trying to postpone reality for just a little longer. Every step he took felt heavy, echoing with the truth he could no longer run from. The early air was colder than usual, carrying the faint scent of damp earth mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee drifting from some early riser's home. Ethan inhaled deeply as he crossed the courtyard of the shelter. He had barely slept. His thoughts had spun relentlessly through everything he had discovered and everything he had lost. But one decision stood before him, undeniable. He needed to tell Mary that he had found his mother, and he needed to tell her that he had found her too late. When he walked into the small room where volunteers rotated through their night shifts, he found Mary sorting boxes of supplies, as she always did before sunrise. She often said this was the perfect hour to prepare for the long day ahead, when the rest of the staff had not yet arrived. The moment she saw him, she stopped. One look at his face told her everything. "Ethan." Her voice was soft, careful, as though afraid of the answer she already sensed. He forced a breath into his lungs. "I found her, Mary." Mary's eyes shifted sharply toward him, wide, empathetic, understanding in a way that only someone who had witnessed human suffering daily could be. She's not alive, is she?" she asked quietly. Ethan lowered his head slowly, a tightness gripping his throat. He didn't cry. He had already cried more in one night than he thought possible, but his face carried the unmistakable weight of a man shattered. "No," he finally answered, his voice raw. "She passed a few years ago, alone, without anyone by her side. She was buried in a modest place, with her name barely noted in a file almost no one ever looked at." Mary stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It wasn't pity, it was humanity. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the people who love the hardest are the ones who hide the most. Not because they want to disappear, but because they believe it's the only way to protect the ones they care about." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That truth hit him deeply, painfully, because he now understood that was exactly what his mother had done. For years he believed she had abandoned him, but the truth was far more heartbreaking and far more noble. She hid herself to give him what she thought he deserved, a chance at a life she believed she couldn't provide, a silent sacrifice, a decision she never explained to anyone. "She really thought she was doing the right thing," Ethan murmured, "even if it meant cutting herself out of my life." Mary nodded slowly. "She loved you," she said firmly. "Maybe imperfectly, maybe through fear, but it was love. And now you know." He did know. It didn't erase the pain, it didn't make the loss easier, but it gave meaning to a wound he had carried for so long. And now he had to choose what to do with that truth. In the dim morning light, while the sky shifted from grey to pale gold, Ethan made a decision that would shape not only his future, but the future of the town. The symbolic funeral was arranged with simple dignity. Ethan insisted on a quiet ceremony, without extravagance. He didn't want his mother's farewell to be a spectacle. He wanted to give her what no one had given her while she lived: respect. He chose a small, peaceful area surrounded by old trees whose branches swayed gently in the breeze. The place carried a serene beauty, perfect for someone who had spent her life trying not to burden anyone. Mary stood by his side throughout the ceremony. A few volunteers from the shelter also attended, strangers who had never met his mother, but who understood the importance of honoring a forgotten life. When the others left, Ethan remained alone in front of the modest headstone, marked only by her name. He did not bring elaborate flowers or ornate decorations. He simply placed an old photograph, the only picture he had of the two of them. He was just a small boy in it, resting in her arms, and she was smiling with a tenderness he finally understood. "I came back, Mom," he whispered, touching the cool stone. "A little too late, but I came back." A soft breeze brushed his face. He closed his eyes, not imagining any mystical meaning, just grounding himself in the reality of the moment, wishing he could hear her voice one last time. It was in that stillness that he finally understood what he needed to do. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned to the shelter. The town was waking from its quiet rhythm, people walking with grocery bags, shop doors opening, the usual hum of daily life. But now the place looked different to him. It was no longer just a backdrop to his childhood. It was the landscape of his mother's final years, years marked by loneliness and silence. He stepped into the small office where Mary worked. She looked up from her paperwork, tired but steadfast. "Mary," he said, closing the door behind him, "I need to talk to you." She set her pen down and gave him her full attention. "I want to renovate this place." She blinked, caught off guard. "You want to renovate the shelter?" "Not just renovate," Ethan said, taking a seat across from her. "I want to expand it. I want it to be safe, modern, efficient. I want trained staff, mental health support, legal aid, long-term assistance, everything. I want this place to ensure that no one here becomes invisible the way my mother did." Mary stared at him, stunned. "Ethan, that's huge. That takes planning, funding, partnerships. For a town like this, it sounds nearly impossible." For a town like this, he repeated gently. Maybe it is, but it's not impossible for me. Not after what I learned. Not after what I lost. I spent years building my life, believing wealth would fill the gaps left by my past. But now I know money means nothing if it doesn't change something for someone else. Her expression softened as she listened. I want to finance it all, Ethan continued. I want this place to survive for years. I want every person who walks in to feel visible, to feel human, to feel that they matter. Mary's eyes glistened, a mix of emotion and disbelief. This could change everything, she whispered. That's exactly what I want, he replied. And I want to do it for her, because she deserved more than loneliness. Mary stood, walked around the desk, and stood beside him. You know this won't erase the past, she said quietly. It won't bring her back. I know, he said. But it can give other people a future, and that's enough. She nodded, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Then let's do it together. What followed were intense weeks of planning, meetings, construction evaluations, negotiations, and countless decisions. The town buzzed with talk of the project. Some welcomed it, others were skeptical, and a few resisted change, as people often do when the familiar is threatened. But Ethan remained steady. Mary became his right hand throughout the process. He brought the resources. She brought the heart, the experience, the intuition needed to shape the shelter into something meaningful. Little by little, the transformation began. Walls were rebuilt, rooms redesigned, a therapy space added, a proper kitchen installed, a garden created to give residents a place to breathe, and more importantly, a new sense of dignity took root. Ethan met every person who walked through the door. Their stories were painful, inspiring, heartbreaking. Some reminded him painfully of his mother, the quiet suffering, the endurance, the silence, and every story fueled his purpose. Months later, the official reopening of the shelter drew a crowd. The building, warmly lit and freshly renovated, looked nothing like the worn-down structure it had once been. A simple plaque stood by the entrance. It read, Rosa Miller Community Center, a place of dignity, hope, and belonging. Ethan had chosen the name alone. Mary gave a heartfelt speech, then invited Ethan to address the crowd. He walked to the small platform, hands slightly trembling from emotion rather than nerves. I came back to this town looking for answers, he began. For years, I believed I had been abandoned. But the truth I discovered showed me something different. My mother never stopped loving me. She simply thought disappearing was the only way to give me a better life. He paused, exhaling slowly. I can't change the past. I can't rewrite our story. But I can honor her. And I can make sure no one else here has to disappear in silence. He looked at the building, at everything it now represented. This center isn't about money. It's about people. It's about second chances. It's about seeing those who have been overlooked. It's the least I can do for the woman who gave me everything she had, even when she thought it wasn't enough. The crowd listened in a heavy, thoughtful silence before breaking into gentle applause. Afterward, Mary approached him with a soft smile. You did something beautiful, she said. Ethan looked at the sky, now painted in hues of gold. I finally understand, he replied, that true wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give back. She took his hand for a moment. She would be proud. For the first time in a long while, Ethan believed that. A light breeze brushed past them. Nothing symbolic, just the evening air settling in. Still, it was enough to make him smile. A smile born from pain, but strengthened by purpose. Because he had finally found what he'd been searching for. Not the mother he lost, but the man he needed to become.